Thanks for joining us at Ride On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the 1955 Jukebox Forward model kit from Revell, number 85-4036. It's one from the Revell Motorsports series and molded in 1/25th scale. There's 115 pieces, molded in white, chrome, and clear. It comes with no brand 2-piece rear drag and front runner drag tires. Outstanding water slide decals are included, which are crisp and colorful. The model body is very lightweight, almost milky thin. It's clear of dye marks and flash. And the rest of the parts are also very crisp and clean. The chrome is bright and smooth, and the clear parts are nicely sharp and polished. There wasn't any release agent on the body or parts, and so it didn't even seem to need any washing. The direction sheets are very clear, and the building locations for the parts are clearly understood. When you're done, the model's about 8 1/4 inches in length, 3.5 inches wide, and 3 inches tall. Here are the kit's contents, and you can also see the very colorful decal sheet there. The colors are bright and crisp, and the registry is good, but I'll caution you, you should probably use some of the decal setting solutions on the aftermarket to make sure they nestle into the contours. Also, be reminded to use the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when you use any of the products that you see or hear mentioned here in the review. For the most part, we'll be using liquid glue for Model Master and some super glue for strength for small pieces, and occasionally some clear white glue for the windows and glass. This build begins with the interior tub and chassis cage assembly, and the interior tub consists of 8 parts, as you see here, with the basic chassis and the cage plus the dashboard panel. So grab these from the kit now. So I put the roll cage together first to the interior, and I used a little super glue for the small roll bar pieces and joints to make sure that it was good and strong. This will also help make for a better looking interior once it's done. So after you get this completed and it's dry, go ahead and spray the interior with a semi-gloss black. Tight fitting is a must, but everything went together very well and no adjustments were needed. So I used a duplicolor semi-gloss black for this, and you'll be able to fish the interior pieces in between there later on. The engine is a simplified unit consisting of 2 block halves and some heads. So pull these parts out and we'll put those together. And as you can see, it's pretty simple construction. Then the headers, they come in 2 pieces, so they're not put together. When attached to the cylinder heads, then you can place those in between each other so that they are proper header configuration. And once all the parts are assembled, the engine is painted a gunmetal gray there later on. Continuing on with the engine, we can add the valve covers in the chrome front engine section, and also note that the intake parts are there's 2 separate parts, so they're marked numbers 135 and 62. The correct intake for this engine would be part number 135. So assemble all those components at this time. Found one small issue in the directions here regarding the engine. It shows part number 133, the pump belt, going to the left side of the lower block, but it actually goes on the right side. So that was the only problem. Just looking at the instructions in the box art helped figure this out. So just make sure that goes on the right side of the engine. I used some of the bottle paints to give the carburetors a gold tint with some black inserts there for the interior. And then the coolant manifold was painted red and blue with Sharpie markers on the fittings only. Now the belts were painted with Tester's black bottle paint and a real small brush. The engine fits perfectly into the frame assembly, but also just to remind you, make sure you scrape off any paint or chrome when you're gluing parts together so that they adhere properly. Now there were 3 clear location points for gluing it into place, and so the engine was then test fitted and used some good quick drying glue to put that in there, and I used actually some super glue to make sure that stayed in place. Now the frame and the engine are assembled without any issues, and then again everything was test fit first and glued into place with some fast setting glues. Grab these pieces out for the rear end. It consists of 7 major parts, and be careful trimming the parts away from the tree. They're very fragile. A good sharp blade is really necessary when removing them. Now study the directions well, and there are clear location points for the placement, so the test fitting is essential as well. But the rear end was assembled and then test fit onto the chassis, and if you need to make any adjustments, do that before the slow setting glue here sets so that you can position it properly. I sprayed the rear end pieces there with some Duplicolor silver spray, and then I gave it a wash of some 50/50 thinner and flat black to give it, some used look. It was kind of just dirtied up there so that it brings out some of the highlights and looks a little bit more like it's been on the track for a while. The thinner gets pooled into cracks, so just wipe it off and let it dry, and then the tiniest little bit of thinner is needed for that effect. So here again, painting this after the assembly makes it look just a little bit more realistic, and the rear end was glued into place with some super glue once the paint was dry. Paint the drive shaft semi-gloss black, and once it's dry, glue it into place. It lines up perfectly there with the transmission. Now we can attach the steering rack and steering shaft to the car. Finish the steering shaft, just kind of fish it through the firewall and get it behind the headers. It takes a little time, but finesse it in there. And then it was matched up with the steering rack. Now the shaft itself is very delicate and can break easily, so handle it carefully and use some super glue for this joint. As you can see, the steering shaft here, fortunately it'll go right into place and line up with the steering wheel post inside the cage. And once the shaft is in place between the rack and the post, just glue it in there with a toothpick and a dab of super glue on the end. It just takes a little patience to get the job done in this manner. The oil tank, it comes in 3 pieces, so before gluing the oil tank parts together, clean the chrome off from the gluing areas for a good bond, and then the completed tank went into place at a clear location point noted on the firewall there. Now we'll attach the right and left side frame rails, and they're a little tricky to get into place. Get the bar behind the engine mount and attach it to the firewall and frame. And first the mount was given a little dab of fast setting glue, and the rail was set into place, and then the frame, and then the firewall. Now there are clear location points for all of this, but doing them one at a time seems to work the best, so allow the glue to dry a little bit before putting the struts into place there too. Moving on to the wheel assemblies, the wheel pieces are the 2-piece units, and scrape the chrome off where they're going to contact each other inside the middle of the tire there, and go ahead and assemble those. And once dry, you can slip the tires over those rims and get them staged. Now the tire was then put on, and then the hub was glued to the inside to keep the tire on, and they were given kind of a roughing up of the tread areas there on some flat sandpaper, like a 220 grit, something light, just to give them a worn look. Go ahead and snap the tires onto the spindle hubs there. Hardly any pressure is needed, so snap those into place on the axle studs. Grab all those small pieces for the interior inside the cockpit, and using a little patience, you'll be able to get those into place. I used a set of tweezers to set the parts there, like the gas and the clutch pedals, the shifter, and the RPM gauge, and it worked pretty well. The seat was pretty basic, so I added some pinstripe tape to use for seat belts. It's not real common, but I don't know, it gave it some eye appeal and something to look at from the exterior there. The tape was cut to length and laid to the seat in proper places, and it's not too difficult to do. You just add a little detail to it. At this point, you're going to want to install the seat first, that's the white arrow here, and then install the steering wheel into place so that there's room to place that into position. So next is time to start prepping the body. Go ahead and use some fine sandpaper to remove any of the mold seams or blemishes that you find on the body, and then give it a good spray with a good automotive type primer there to inside and out to make sure that it's all covered, and then let her dry overnight. Then you're going to want to test fit the chassis and the body assembly to make sure everything lines up, and it should. Mine looked pretty good, so yours should too. I used a few light coats of duplicolor silver here for the first body color, and then a couple of wetter coats to give it a good even sheen. I complemented the silver base coats with 2 coats of the Toreador red metallic. There's about 10 minutes between coats, and that silver will help the brightness show through of the metallic paint. I followed this up with about 3 coats of clear coat paint to give it a nice brilliant shine. And then after a 24-hour drying period, I polished it out as well so that it would be a finished section of paint when I was finished with the model, despite adding other colors. In order to get the correct angle for the wing, I decided to do some test fitting and mock-up builds here before I actually painted it. So for the flat wing panel, I set it to the car, and then it was kind of propped up into place, and glue was applied to one piece that were held into place as I showed here, and then only 2 pieces were glued together at this point, and that were the flat wing panel and the rear wing panel. So once the glue was dried, then I assembled the wing to the side quarter wings, and then they were painted just as the body had been painted. Then they were allowed to dry overnight before gluing them to the car. Now there's other ways to deal with the wing, but that's how I wanted to build it up to make sure it was in proper angles before I put it on. And I thought I'd get better paint coverage this way too. Next, I trimmed the window moldings with some foil application. It's kind of like tape. You buy that at a hobby shop or online. You just cut off strips that are the appropriate size and then trim off the excess with a very sharp hobby knife blade, and then kind of tamp it into place and burnish it down, and it looks like real automotive trim. So now it's time to decal your body, and some of these are large, so I strongly suggest using a lot of warm water. Keep that water warm, and you put it not only on the decal to release it from the carrier, but also to put it on the model itself to make sure you can shift those decals into place. And further than that, you're going to want to use, for large decals like this, some of these solvent solutions that help those conform to contours and nestle in. So I would start with the largest decals and put those on first, and get those into place, smooth out any air bubbles or water that's trapped underneath them, and then the smaller decals that go on to them after that. The edges of the window glass were painted with some gloss black craft paint, and one of the benefits there is that if you make a mistake, you can clean it up with warm water. I just used a fine brush, and the tip of the brush was fully loaded, and then I just glide the inside of the plastic window and using a light touch there so the paint was allowed to dry before moving on, and any issues that had weren't just perfect, I just cleaned them up and painted it again. Attaching the glass to the body was a little tricky, and I just used a small dot of glue applied in the ridge areas that would be the most contact points. So test fit them and you'll see where those are, and kind of allowed to thicken and tack up for a few seconds, and then I set the window into place. The front and rear glass needs to be glued on from the underside, and I used a toothpick to apply some glue to the edges of the glass and allowed that to get tacky. The glass was then attached to the underside of the body. Now there's a risk of squeezing the glue out, so I'd use either crystal clear or some white glue to make sure that glue dries clear, and then just use the smallest amount you need to make sure that you don't get too much excess there. Tester's tube glue can haze it up, but I would stick with some white glue to make sure that you don't get any frost or any hazing on your windows. Next, I colored the taillights with a Sharpie marker, a red Sharpie marker, and that makes for a nice look over the chromed part there. So scrape the glue off where you're going to glue the taillights into the body, and then they fit perfectly there with no problems. So put them into place, and they need to be placed there before the rear wing and its side panels are glued on. So because we had mocked up your test fit there for the wing and then painted that prior to this, we can now assemble the wing into position, and it'll line right up so that the side panel will fit right onto the wing and the body. So at this point I went ahead and painted the roof inside and the pillars and door panels flat black. It's drying here, but it'll dry flat and have a nice interior look. We'll add the fuel tank and the nitrous tanks back here. I didn't do any detailing on it because you really can't see this upper portion. However, I mean it's ripe for detailing. If you want to, you could add tubes and hoses, etc. So now we could add the lens blanks to the headlight area there, and then the grill, which I used a little of that 50-50 black wash and thinner to give a little detail to the grill area, and they'll glue right into place without any problems. They fit perfectly. Just remove the chrome before you try to glue those into position. So now you can go ahead and scrape the chrome off of the support bar here for the chute, and paint the chute black and attach that to the back end. Here's where I took a little artistic license. I went ahead and added some M&H insignias to the tires because they look so plain, but you can buy these on the aftermarket and that would really make this kit stand out. Here is a view of the underside of the chassis, and it's a nice clean build just as a box stock build, but it's really impressive kit, and I think that you'll enjoy this if you decide to build one. Well, there you have it. This is a nice clean build and just a gorgeous, awesome looking model when you're done with it. Everything fit pretty well. There's just a few placement points that weren't well pointed out, but you can use a little test fitting to solve those issues. There was very little flash, and this is a reissued kit, and I'm happy to see them bringing some of these classics back. I would say it's for the more experienced builder, mostly because of the painting, trimming, and decal work. But I think you could put this together with a little patience and time. And if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. We hope you like this step-by-step premium model kit review. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. But you can always find us on Facebook or at our website, www.rightonreplicas.com. Thanks!